That helps the physically challenged and underserved improve their life with yoga. We've had a wonderful experience over this 9-month cycle where we've been experimenting in sharing accessible yoga in this format of internet TV talk. We've invited the viewers and listeners, or at least I have and our guests, to call in at 919-518-9773. And I encourage you to consider that today because we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Steffany Moonaz. We also can have you Skype in at Computers 2K Voice. That's Computers 2K Voice on Skype, or log in on the chat box. It's a very special opportunity as Steffany has a lot of insights about dance, movement, and the path and choosing opportunities when they come up. So we have some great philosophy as well as insights on the science of arthritis. We're also going to have some insights on the future of this show, in that this is the last show. Yes. So viewers and listeners, hopefully you'll check in with us, or in the future, log into our website, youcallthisyoga.org, so that you can be in our mailing list and stay engaged with us. We're also rebuilding the website where we'll have all the shows cataloged, and therefore also have our pearls of wisdom on one giant strand. Steffany will be culminating the strand today with some of her insights and philosophy. So then we can take our hands off our heart and be prepared to learn about Steffany, who I've met in the last year, but as I've learned more, our paths have some similarities in that we're both very intimate with arthritis. She is as a dancer, athlete, researcher, yoga teacher, and more. And me as a guy who liked to throw his body into things and torque it as a dentist, ultimately finding yoga as some of the relief, plus some surgery. So let's bring on Steffany as I've rambled my mandatory 3 minutes, and let's ask her how she has found dance and yoga to be a confluent practice. Good morning, Steffany.
Good morning, Howie. It's such a pleasure to be here and an honor to serve as the punctuation on, hopefully an exclamation point, on really what is a wonderful offering that you have here.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Well, I consider more, but just not right now. So let
the show go on in whatever form it may, and I look forward to seeing more from you.
Thank you.
So your question is about how I have found yoga and dance to be confluent. Yes?
Yes.
So you want to hear a little bit about my background?
Absolutely. That was another way of saying, tell us about the origin of your path.
Sure. So I was born to a dance teacher. So that was, whether that was chosen by me or some other serendipity, I started in dance classes when I was 3 because my mother was teaching at the dance studio and she put me in the creative rhythms class that was offered. And I took to it and became pretty serious about dance, and ultimately majored in dance in college and also earned a Master of Fine Arts in Dance in choreography. So when I was growing up, my parents fostered that and encouraged me in dance, but they were a little bit concerned about the narrowness of my focus. and they sent me to a performing arts camp, but they kept wanting to steer me in the direction of trying other things, like why don't you take a music class or why don't you take an art class? And all I wanted to do was dance.
Mm.
And so I did, you know, I was in theater and choir and all of that, but my true love was dance. And it was through dance that I was initially exposed to asana, because asana are often used as part of yoga, as part of dance training, not even necessarily by name, but they just show up in the warm-ups and even in the choreography. And you see that in culture and life, that asana just show up more so now, you know, we recognize them, but
Mm-hmm.
that was my earliest exposure to yoga, was just in the context of dance, and I didn't even know that it was yoga. And of course also breath control, which is so essential to any athletic performance, and certainly dance, where the breath is not only fostering the actual execution of the movement, but also helping to achieve a particular mood or quality to the movement.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the more philosophical aspects of yoga. Again, I didn't know it was yoga at the time, except that I remember having a particular experience, probably in grade school, when I had had a crummy day. I've lived a very blessed life, but I had a crummy day, you know, in like somebody was mad at somebody for something in the drama of, you know, young girl relationships. And I remember coming into the studio with an attitude and feeling lousy. And it wasn't long into my first class, because I would attend several classes in an evening, that it occurred to me that I was no longer bothered, that whatever it was that was my issue, my funk, mood, etc., had just dissipated. And in fact, whatever the issue was gone from my thoughts too. So the emotions and the thoughts had lifted through the physical practice,
Mm-hmm.
which of course is yoga.
Yes.
And at the time, so I would now call that mindful movement or embodied mindfulness, whether it's a dance sequence or an asana practice. But I remember distinctly having the thought that there are lots of people who suffer. And this, you know, this was like the tiniest drop of suffering that I might have been experiencing in this moment, but it was gone. And I thought, there are lots of people who suffer, and far worse. And if more people knew about this, if more people had access to this experience that I would now call mindfulness and embodied mindfulness, there would be less suffering. And so I decided at that tender age that I was going to make it my mission to help alleviate suffering by helping more people to experience this. And at the time I thought, well, I must be a neuroscientist then, because this has to be happening in my brain chemistry. And in order to help people with it, I have to figure out, what exactly is it? What's happening? So I went into neuroscience and changed my mind that that wasn't the path for me. But all these many years later, I look back on that and I think, well, of course, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yes. But as we can appreciate, when at the beginning of a path where we have to go through all the developmental phases to get to the fine point, there's so many hurdles in that way because of convention and necessity. So, and I can appreciate that in the path of being a dentist and having a vision of what I wanted to be. And the path in dental school is much more arduous, or even in anything that we set out for, it's not necessarily going to be what it is. So, viewers and listeners, basically, Steffany, from my understanding, was very bored by neuroscience because, as you can imagine, that could be pretty tedious stuff if you're an undergraduate. And we want to get there. We want to do some brain surgery. We want to see what's going on.
Well, you know, this was the 90s, not to age myself, but during that time, neuroscience, at least in undergraduate school, was a whole lot about rat experimentation, and that was not really my cup of tea. I wanted to study the mind-body connection, right? And so I actually, it was many years until I found public health. But I realized once I found public health that, well, this was it. The slogan for Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which is where I did my doctoral studies, is saving lives millions at a time. Well, how aspirational is that?
Yes.
So that seemed more in line with the kind of moving and shaking that I wanted to do.
Yes, and
literally and figuratively.
Yes. Well, it's about staying active. Viewers and listeners, a really fascinating talk, and I'll throw Steffany on the limelight here, is her serendipitous path. And if you look on her website, it's a really wonderful story of being open to the possibilities, but also being true to your passion. And that's what I think is really compelling about the path Steffany's been on, but also the work that she's doing and the way that she's been able to negotiate some adversity and some challenges that have led her to be even more in tune with where she wants to be. And so she is helping be part of that Hopkins mission through her organization, or I guess we can call it an entity. Could you describe jumping forward from your insights to how you've put it into action?
Yeah, so the serendipitous story sort of dropped my Dharma in my lap. I never set out to study arthritis, and particularly the systemic autoimmune conditions that I work with so frequently. I did not even understand or know about when I first embarked on this work. And it really was through being open to opportunities as they arose. But I ended up gratefully doing my doctoral dissertation on the effects of yoga for people with rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis in the Department of Rheumatology at Johns Hopkins. And during the time that I was conducting this research, we were so fortunate to have a lot of different sources of grant funding, and we were able to make this the most rigorous and robust study of its kind. It was a very popular, sexy topic at that time, and I was getting, calls from magazines, and whenever I gave a talk at a conference, there would be people wanting to interview me afterwards. So I got a little bit of notoriety for that research, even as a doctoral student. And my name became associated with this work. And so people with arthritis would reach out to me and ask me, where do I find a teacher? Where do I find a class? I want to start practicing yoga. What should I do? And so I did provide some articles with tips and suggestions for finding a teacher and that sort of thing. But I also had teachers contacting me, yoga teachers, saying, people with arthritis are coming to my classes, and I don't know how to keep them safe. I don't know what to do for them. What do you suggest? And I thought, after enough of this, well, I have to do something. I'm in a position that I have the opportunity to further the understanding on the part of yoga teachers of this population, and therefore serve the population, helping people to help people. So I started offering continuing education programs based on the research that we were doing in the Johns Hopkins study. And that grew and became an organization called Yoga for Arthritis. And it was through my visibility and work in Yoga for Arthritis that I ended up affiliated with the Maryland University of Integrative Health, where I'm able to continue conducting research on yoga and other integrative health practices.
Yes, it's an interesting, growthful process where the timing was just right.
Yes.
And you were ready, very ready, and that there wasn't much in front of you to stop you. There was great support. Well, viewers and listeners, as Stephanie had mentioned about research and where she is now at Maryland University, I'd like to just switch over to our first pearl and learn a little bit more about yoga and research-based science.
In my work as a yoga researcher, we tend to evaluate outcomes that are readily measurable. And in working with arthritis patients, it's oftentimes assumed that the way that yoga is helpful is through changes in the physiology of the musculoskeletal system and how it works, joint structure, how the muscles support the joints, etc. In my experience, however, anecdotally, I've found that the most powerful changes for people living with arthritis is in their perspective around their disease, their relationship to their body, and the meaning of the experiences that they're having. While those aspects of their experience are not as easily measurable, they can be so much more powerful than what might be happening on the level of the joint. And it's worth considering what yoga practices might be best suited to helping facilitate a change in perspective rather than just a change in physiology.
Well, viewers and listeners, my history is such that arthritis has been an intimate partner with me for decades. So even if you don't call or write in or Skype in, I will be
You have
engaging
plenty to
Stephanie
share.
pretty heartily. Because,
So,
oh,
Howie, I have a question for you.
tell.
Have you found that yoga has been a path toward meaning in the experience of your arthritis?
Oh, absolutely. Uh, I was suffering in a limited way when I was first introduced to gentle yoga and in Esther Meyer's lineage, and found that it was accessible, but not necessarily thoroughly practicable. I've had limits as a tight bodied, contracted dentist, and also with some limitations from developmental arthritis, known as Osgood-Schlatter, where
Oh,
my bones grew excessively and I've had loss of joint space because of excess growth. And because of that, I had limits in my running and walking capacity. So I have to get back to the question. So I've been negotiating limits in my movement and some discomfort for quite a while. And with the adaptive yoga, I felt that I could participate in something and also prepare for and negotiate afterwards my activities. Of course, I was also taking anti-inflammatories uh, because I wanted to participate.
right.
But but when I was really in touch with my disorder and the pain from it, it was very emotionally disturbing. I was down and depressed. My perspective on what I wanted to do and how I wanted to live was compromised. And that at least when I was practicing yoga in some form that I was adapting, it was something that I could do to the pace that I could practice it and the space that I could feel safe in.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Not that it was embarrassing. I had no problem going and doing half moon against the wall to the capacity or adapting triangle to like a crook neck arm as long as my chest is open and there's some degree of integrity. So it provides a means for many years for me to participate in life.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to say that the asana was not as important as everyone suggests. So, for arthritis, asana seems the most obvious. So this is a musculoskeletal disease. Asana is a musculoskeletal practice. Obviously, asana would be the practice that would be most likely to change the experience of arthritis. And so I felt it my job to point out, well, arthritis doesn't only affect the musculoskeletal system, it affects the entire person who happens to have a musculoskeletal system, including many other body systems, but also all of the other koshas. And so the other practices that more directly affect other layers of one's being have the opportunity to also shift and change the experience of arthritis, regardless of the joint space narrowing. However, in reflecting on some of the most powerful stories, I've been privy to so many powerful stories, it often happens that the profound shift in meaning happens in asana. So not necessarily about how is the asana changing the structure of the joint, but what is happening in the asana that changes the way that I relate to my body, or what is the meaning of this particular pose even energetically, and then how does that change the way that I move through the world and relate to my disease, sometimes in a single moment, in a single pose.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's really a goal of mine to move past, yes, there are structural changes. Yes, yoga facilitates improved strength and flexibility and joint mobility and all of those things. And there is so much more to life with arthritis, and there's so much more to yoga practice.
Yes, and my contention is that yoga is an all-day practice,
Right.
as opposed to an isolated practice. For my arthritis, I'm highly motivated not to have more surgery or any discomfort, and to acquire whatever diminished capacity I can manage. And therefore, I'm looking to have a very subtle asana
Right.
that may not be always conscious, but if I'm trying to sit up and I'm trying to shift my feet from
Yeah.
some static, corrupt position to an occasional grounded position, and that's my moving meditation while I involve myself with chatter most other parts of the time.
I'll say, Howie, that I sometimes say that ideally I'm practicing yoga all of the time, because yoga is not a thing that you do, it's a state of being, it's a state of union. And in the earliest texts, it's not talked about as a verb. However, I also find that some yoga teachers, yoga therapists, dismiss the importance of a dedicated practice by saying, well, I'm practicing yoga all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certainly, when I am working with a client, I'm always giving them, instead of here's the sequence you're going to do, here's something you can do when you're sitting in the car, here's something you can do when you're standing in line, here's something you can do in bed before you go to sleep, so that it's infused throughout the day. But there is also something to be said for the dedication, the tapas of dedicated practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to shift a little, but stay with what you're saying in creating access, because we're all about accessible yoga.
Yeah.
And when I was scrutinizing your website and enjoying what you're offering there, there's many opportunities for the new practitioner as well as teachers on there. And what I was particularly impressed with was the listing of all these resources of organizations that are informative or social of influencing on a grand national level. So could you talk a little bit about the resources for accessibility on your website and clarify the website for folks?
Yeah. Okay. So the website, has shifted and changed so much over time. And so, um, so there's a lot there, and there's actually even a membership structure where you can go into the back end and get access to even more resources. But there are a couple of organizations that I might particularly bring to mind. One of them is Accessible Yoga, which I know you've had Jivana Heyman on, and I am actually on the board of Accessible Yoga. It's an organization that I think is just absolutely so important. And I consider Yoga for Arthritis to be under the umbrella of Accessible Yoga, because Accessible Yoga is about making yoga accessible to everyone. And the work that I do is about making yoga accessible to a particular group of people who may otherwise be excluded. But many of your speakers, perhaps all of them, are dedicated to making yoga accessible to various groups that may feel excluded from the practice or not touched by the practice. Another important organization to this work is the Arthritis Foundation. So the Arthritis Foundation, which of course has the mission of serving people with arthritis around the country, they were one of the funders of our early research, and they commissioned the Arthritis Friendly Yoga DVD that I made a few years ago, and have been really huge proponents of this work. They endorse our teachers, and our Yoga for Arthritis teachers go to local Arthritis Foundation events in order to bring the practices to people there. So it's a really nice relationship that we have with them as well. I don't know if there are other organizations that stood out to you on the page, but those are two that I wanted to mention off the bat.
Well, that's a great start, because we don't have to list all of them now. We just hope
you
that
can go to the site.
Right. And could you clearly cite the website for everyone to hear it?
Arthritis.yoga.
.com.
That's it. No, arthritis.
There's nothing.
.yoga.
Oh, that's right.
Most people don't know you can have yoga as
right
the end of your website.
That's why I allowed myself to act like I was confused. But it's a pretty fascinating thing just to be able to have .yoga, and I think that was noticeable. Viewers and listeners, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit, because I wasn't remembering if Steffany had verbally shared Pearl 2, and then I questioned whether I showed it or not. But we're going to show you Pearl 2, because we like that idea so much. Thank you, Amnon.
In my work as a yoga researcher, we tend to evaluate outcomes that are readily measurable. And in working with arthritis patients, it's oftentimes assumed that the way that yoga is helpful is through changes in the physiology of the musculoskeletal system and how it works, joint structure, how the muscles support the joints, etc. In my experience, however, anecdotally, I've found that the most powerful changes for people living with arthritis is in their perspective around their disease, their relationship to their body, and the meaning of the experiences that they're having. While those aspects of their experience are not as easily measurable, they can be so much more powerful than what might be happening on the level of the joint. And it's worth considering what yoga practices might be best suited to helping facilitate a change in perspective rather than just a change in physiology.
Part of the reason I wanted to come back to that Pearl was because I did have another thought, and that was part of yoga practices. Mm-hmm. And that we talk about asana, but it's also preparation for meditation.
Right.
And that I'd like you to weave in how the yoga for arthritis training includes that.
Yeah, actually, I'm so fascinated by this, especially in recent years. When people are living with chronic pain, there are actually changes in the brain as a result of living with chronic pain. So there is a deterioration of gray matter in certain areas of the brain, and it actually makes people more sensitive to other stimuli. So, for example, if you have arthritis in your knees and you put your hand in an ice bucket, you are more sensitive to the experience in that ice bucket because of the chronic pain that you've been living with in your knees. It turns out that meditation builds gray matter, and meditation builds gray matter in the same regions of the brain that are affected by the experience of chronic pain. So in that sense, meditation is an antidote for the effect of pain on the brain.
Hit me two times on that one. Say that again. Because I'm a chronic pain alumni, so
right. So chronic pain, life with chronic pain affects your brain. Okay? So it reduces gray matter in the brain. Meditation affects your brain. It builds gray matter in the brain in the same region. So chronic pain reduces gray matter, meditation builds gray matter, which means that you can use meditation to reverse the effects of chronic pain on your brain. Now, that isn't to say that the meditation is going to make the pain go away, although it could affect your perspective about the pain, your relationship to the pain, what it means to you, how much you tolerate it, how much you get absorbed in the story of the pain. And it might also affect how you physically feel the pain, because it can counteract the descending pain pathway, the hypersensitivity to pain that comes with chronic pain. So when we talk about the pain symptom of arthritis has other symptoms too, but when we're talking about pain processing is not just happening in your joint. Pain is an output of the brain. I tell my students, if there's anything that you learn from this entire training, I want you to know that pain is an output of the brain. And because pain is an output of the brain, changes in brain structure and function affect the experience of pain no matter where it is in the body.
That's pretty profound.
Yeah, isn't that powerful? And so if we skip the meditation, then we're skipping an essential tool that could help to address some of the symptoms of arthritis in a very real way. Now, the challenge with that, and I think you were starting to get to this, is that it's not necessarily comfortable to sit still, well, for anyone, but especially if you have arthritis. If you're living with joint pain and then you're going to sit cross-legged on the floor for 20 minutes, good luck not being distracted. So, and especially, you might actually be doing some harm. And we always want to ground the practices in the foundation of ahimsa. So the asana practice can be a way to prepare the body to be more comfortable, but it's also not a requirement that you sit cross-legged on the floor to meditate. And so for people living with arthritis, it's really important to find a position that supports the body in balance and alignment so that you can be comfortable. For some people, that's going to be sitting in a chair with back support. For some people, it might even be reclining. And for others, maybe it's a moving meditation, like the walking meditation that you mentioned earlier. So there are lots of ways in, and there are lots of meditation techniques. And people with arthritis might want to try on different meditation styles to find something that resonates with them, and commit to trying that out for a while, and that changes. So there have been various points in my life when I've been drawn to one style of meditation or another, and there's evidence that the different meditation styles have different outcomes in the way that you might expect. So when you have a meditation practice that is attentional, concentration meditation, you become more adept at concentrating and more adept at, ignoring distractions and staying focused and that sort of thing. Whereas a loving kindness meditation fosters more compassion and positive moods, and a mindfulness meditation makes you more present in the moment and more aware of what's going on around you. So it might also help to consider, well, what does this meditation do and what am I looking for in terms of its effects in my life?
Lovely. Well, time for another pearl. Steffany just opened up another oyster.
When working to make an asana practice accessible, we often think about what different variations or options we might offer for a pose that would make it available and accessible to the widest audience. But it isn't just about what those options are that makes a yoga practice accessible. It's also about how they're being offered. What's the language being used? Is there a hierarchy that's suggested as far as which pose variation is normative or remedial? Can they be presented as a buffet so that people feel able to choose whatever option is most appropriate for them without feeling less than for the choice that they've made?
And although the pearl is about processes with asana, it's also comparable to how we prepare our bodies physically when in meditation, and also the buffet of what mantra we may or may not use.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty fascinating that we have that. Viewers and listeners, with my arthritis, I'm a sit on three bolsters kind of guy against the wall with a pillow under my forearms so I can have my elbows tucked in and drop my shoulder blades and let my head draw back towards the wall if possible, but not straining. And that's about as necessary for me because my arthritis led to imbalance in my pelvis, which led to imbalance in my spine, and through my rib cage, and through my neck, where I've had multiple surgeries. And therefore, taking all that wonkiness and hoping that it's going to sit still comfortably is a myth. Uh, so I invite teachers and practitioners to explore what is comfortable for you to allow yourself to be in this special spot that you've been building towards, whether it's 30 seconds or 5 minutes or 30 minutes. And Steffany, what resources would you suggest for meditation uh, options? Where do you like to send folks?
So there actually are a few recordings. I'm not sure if they're on the website or if they're on the YouTube channel, uh, but there are some recordings that I think that when you're first starting out with meditation, it's helpful to have a guided meditation, and there are some great meditations available around chronic pain if you want to be working through that during the meditation itself. But as I mentioned, loving kindness meditation, mindfulness meditation, concentrative meditation, even, there's a great app that I sometimes use called Headspace that is really accessible because it starts out very gradually and it explains the techniques and really dispels myths about what should be happening. It's sometimes said, don't should on yourself.
Uh huh.
And I think that that is true in all of these practices. You were talking about how you prop yourself up in meditation. My meditation happens in bed when my alarm goes off and I sit up and I grab my beads off the, and so getting over that this needs to be in a dedicated space, or I need to be on the floor, or I need to light a candle, or I need to set a timer, all of that stuff just gets in the way of me actually doing the practice. And so when I allow myself the freedom to, that any practice is better than no practice, And for people with arthritis who are experiencing flares, that might mean laying in bed in a state of fatigue and noticing the wanderings of the mind. So I think that that also speaks to the pearl of wisdom that you just played, that it's really important in the language of the teacher to make sure that we're not presenting one option as better or worse than another, but that's also part of the work of the yoga, is for us as practitioners to not judge ourselves for what choice is right for us in that moment, which means not straining, not forcing. You know, if we're going to do a modified version, not second guessing the choice of the modified version or judging ourselves for what we can or can't do or what we should be doing. That's all the mental practice of yoga. And that's as important as whatever position we happen to be in, provided it's safe.
True. There's so much imaging that is put out there about what a pose could
Right.
look like, and I guess because I'm been trained to be very critical as a dentist, and I've had to be very critical of my own posturing, and tend to be critical in probably some general way. Hmm. That that I see poses that I just don't agree with because I think that they're really corruptive to our physical nature and that we're interpreting them, but that's not really what we're designed to be doing or being in these poses. And people get exposed to this repeatedly, and it creates, oh, I can't do that because of
Right.
this, and this.
Right.
And it's sort of an all or nothing uh, element that's out there, and that's what we're trying to do is to create that access for
Well,
that.
and I like to think about what is the essence of this pose? What is it that makes, what are the characteristics that make it this instead of something else? So, you know, if we were to choose downward dog, what makes it a downward dog and not a child's pose or not a forward fold? What is the unique signature of that pose? And therefore, what other shapes could I make that would honor the essence of that pose and accomplish either the energetics, the intention, the, you know, the physicality of the pose in a way that honors my own structure or the structure of the people in the room. So in a yoga for arthritis class, you're going to see as many different shapes as there are people. And what I speak to as a teacher is, what is it that unifies all of these shapes? So no matter what shape you're in, we are all lengthening the spine, grounding through the heels, extending out the crown of head, surrendering, you know, stretching the hamstrings, whatever it is that is the focus of that unites all these different shapes. That's what I try to accomplish in, you know, in offering that buffet. That it's not that the cantaloupe is better than the strawberries or vice versa. You just pick the fruit that's best for you today.
Mm. Well, we've talked about buffet, we've talked about some fruit, and so I'm compelled to share about our organization's yoga buffet with lunch included, also known as Yoga Fest NC. This is, I guess, our sponsor spot for the show, as Yoga Fest NC does return on April 7 at the McKimmon Center in Raleigh. We're looking to have an even better, though we don't like to use these contrasts, but in this case we will, because it's been terrific, and we look to have it more to the satisfaction of those participating. In the coming month, we're going to be having a request for teachers to teach at Yoga Fest. We're also going to have vendors, sponsors, and teachers doing mini sessions on the side, in addition to our broad buffet of classes throughout the day, so that people can have little appetizers and side trays of yoga and wellness. So, viewers and listeners, teachers, businesses, Get ready and feel free to reach out to me, Howie at youcallthisyoga.org, if you'd like to learn more about participating with us on Yoga Fest NC 2018 on April 7th in Raleigh. All right, that's a mouthful.
I suspect there might also be some yoga dessert.
Oh, I would suspect so. In the past, we've had a gong bath with our friend Alicia. And oh, if you hadn't had a gong bath, then it's like wiping yourself in yoga cream. I think that's probably the dairy or non-dairy, whichever you prefer. Depends on your allergenicity.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I've really got sort of effacious and about Yoga Fest. So, but let's talk about self-efficacy with our next pearl.
In our research and research by other yoga scientists, yoga practice has been associated with improvements in self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is an individual's belief in their ability to do something, and that can be in general or it can be for a specific behavior like improved exercise self-efficacy or self-efficacy to manage one's own health or one's conditions. Because yoga has the potential to improve self-efficacy, it can result in a whole bunch of other changes in behaviors. People who practice yoga might feel more compelled to try other forms of exercise that they thought were out of reach for them, or other activities in their lives that they were previously feeling limited about. So it's through that improvement in self-efficacy that yoga has the capacity not only to change the experience in the physical body and in mental mind states, but also to change the choices that people feel are available to them in their daily lives.
Steffany, would you share more about this?
Yeah, so there are, when we do a research study, we're looking at the intervention and the outcomes. So you offer, well, in this particular type of study, you offer something and then you see what changes. What you don't know is the order in which it changes, or what leads to what along the way. And so we know that when people practice yoga, their self-efficacy for various behaviors improves, and their physical health improves, and their fitness improves, and their mood improves. We don't know what comes first. And it kind of makes sense in both directions, right? It makes sense that if you're feeling stronger, then you're also feeling more capable of doing things in your life. But the reverse could also be true. If you're feeling more capable, then you're more inclined to do things that are going to build strength. And that's true for a whole host of things. And actually, there's been other research done on how yoga changes other health behaviors. And it's a focus in the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health right now, is to understand exactly how that happens, because we know that when people start practicing yoga, they eat healthier, they exercise more, they sleep better, they manage their stress better. So they have a whole set of skills and options not available previously. And anecdotally, there have been people who have gone through the Yoga for Arthritis study who have taken on things like sailing, weightlifting, running half marathons, people who, living with arthritis, felt so debilitated that they didn't think that they could walk around the block, and are now doing things that they never could have imagined. And I think that self-efficacy is a really important key to that, that when you're practicing something physical with mindful awareness, with attentiveness to what your edge is, what's safe and comfortable, how far you can go, seeing the changes over time, and sometimes executing something that is a little challenging and feeling a sense of triumph from being able to do that, that sense of triumph isn't just isolated to what happens on the mat. It bleeds into daily life in a variety of ways.
I can appreciate that personally, and also as a teacher, personally, since my body has disparities from left to right and up and down, and when I lay on the mat, I can feel those disparities. And over the years, whether it be the shape of my limbs or my spine or the other support bones or the function of the muscles, it still is an inordinate amount of time to affect change, and let alone change that's measurable. And for me, I negotiated what I would call millimeters of progress to really negotiate what is really accessible in this physiological perspective and actually the anatomical perspective. Am I really making all this space, or am I just getting a thread of something that could be very significant? Yet I suspect people can come into yoga um, over expectant of what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And though we share this as, oh yeah, this is a path, however, it's not going to happen the way it happens in a movie. And we could talk about it because we've been on a path for years or decades, and we've made 10 millimeters of progress.
And
But
there's no end to the path.
yeah, but there's 25 millimeters in an inch.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Howie, because I was talking about how people practice yoga and then might feel empowered to do things they didn't realize they can do. But it also works the other way in that a lack of self-efficacy might dissuade someone from even trying yoga in the first place. There was one person who I asked her, because she had been living with rheumatoid arthritis for many years, and I said, well, why didn't you try this sooner? Because after practicing yoga, she is one of the people who became very physically active in other ways. And she said, well, nobody ever told me that I could. It didn't occur to her as possible that somebody with her condition could do something like this. And I think, when we talk about who has access to yoga, it's not just literally who has access to it, but who feels like it will be accessible. And we actually found that in our research, people who enrolled for the study but didn't show up, so essentially who never came to a single class, were more likely to be older, less flexible, and of minority race. And that speaks to the image of who yoga is for and the perceived limitations that might interfere with, I'm too old, and so I'm not going to be able to do it, or, I can't touch my toe. How many times have you heard, I'm not flexible enough to do yoga? But of course, if you went, then you would become more flexible. So I think that the movement of accessible yoga is helping to dispel myths around that and therefore empower people to give yoga a try. But it's also important that they find a class or a teacher or a yoga therapist that is a good fit for them and a practice that is accessible to them, so that they don't feel out of their element and or unsafe or uncomfortable.
Exactly. Well, since you mentioned about finding teachers, could you talk about some of your teacher programs and also resources for yoga practitioners that would like to find qualified yoga teachers?
Yeah, so we have a continuing education program that starts with level 1, which is a 34-hour training, and that's really for yoga teachers who are seeing arthritis show up in their general classes. Maybe they teach beginner classes or gentle classes, and they would like some more skills and more understanding of these conditions. Arthritis is over 100 diseases, so a better understanding of the myriad of diseases under that umbrella. Then there is a mentored practicum where you are able to work one-on-one remotely with one of our master teachers who helps to sort of refine your teaching based on where you are in opportunities for growth. And then there's a level 2, which is more of a shared peer learning experience where we really get up to date on the current science and learn more about how to work one-on-one in a kind of therapeutic sense. So those are the training options that are available for yoga teachers and yoga therapists. The Yoga for Arthritis training is part of several yoga therapy trainings that are accredited with the International Association of Yoga Therapists, but it also works as continuing education for yoga teachers. For someone who has arthritis and is looking for a teacher, we have some people listed on our website by state, and that does not exhaust. So those are people who are certified, who've gone through level 1 mentorship, level 2. But if you don't see your area listed, reach out to us, because that doesn't exhaust everyone who's done the level 1 training. We might be able to provide some recommendations, but also practicing yoga therapists who are certified with IAYT have enough of a foundation in working with chronic pain and these kinds of conditions that they would also be appropriate. So the IAYT.org website is another good place to go. And accessible yoga. So again, accessible yoga is really broad. So not everyone who is an accessible yoga teacher would be appropriate for people with arthritis, but you can search by various search terms and look for teachers who provide accessible classes that way also.
Viewers and listeners, I'll stick my 2 cents in there. It's probably worth $1.50 now because of all the pearls we've added on, is that we have a YouTube channel, the You Call This Yoga YouTube channel, which does have over 50 chair and a few gentle mat-based programs. And we have some guest teachers from our area, in addition to mostly my interpretations and experiences from the learnings over the years. So we try to create safe and gentle programs for you on the internet. Also, from my experience, is that arthritis isn't all that one might understand, even if you think you're smart. And I think I'm one smart fellow in touch with my body, but I'm not that smart. So I've always had a question about arthritis and have continued to be humbled about arthritis. But a little pearl that I'll share about arthritis is the symptom isn't always the source. And that to be mindful of, yes, you might have symptoms somewhere and limitations, and yes, you might have arthritis there, but you might have arthritis somewhere else.
Right.
And it could be on the opposite side of your body. It could be somewhere else, because I've been diagonal.
It could be throughout your entire body.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also, if you don't think you have arthritis and you've been sitting on a chair for how many years now, then you have arthritis. It's just not symptomatic.
Yeah, can I?
So please.
I'll add something about that, Howie, because I'd be remiss if I didn't say, if you think you might have arthritis, you should find out. Go to your family doctor and explain the symptoms that you're having. And, in order to get a diagnosis of arthritis, depending on the type of arthritis, you might need an x-ray, you might need some blood work, you might need, some palpation. So it's better to know, and then you can decide what you do or don't want to do about it. But, knowledge is power. So even if you know that you have arthritis and you're not sure what type it is, that can make a big difference. So I would suggest that everyone make sure to consult with a medical professional if they haven't been diagnosed and they think they might have arthritis. I'll also add that there are some, if your readers and listeners are looking for more content, I just released a workshop with Yoga International on yoga for arthritis that's for people living with arthritis and also yoga teachers, that's available now. And there's another one coming out soon that's all about the knees. So that might be of interest. And I also just have to plug that the Maryland University of Integrative Health has a Master's of Science in Yoga Therapy, the only one in the country. So if you really want to go deep in your study, then consider that.
Wow, you are just at the cradle of yoga civilization there, in the sense of arthritis. So that's really beautiful. That's delightful. And viewers and listeners locally in Raleigh, if you're in our region, Susan Kilman, one of our team, is teaching a chair yoga series starting this week at Bliss Body Yoga. And then I'm going to be a night school teacher at Sanderson High School and Wake County Public Schools starting next month for an 8-week chair yoga series. If you want sitcom, this is the place. We'll also be doing stand-com, but come on in and learn how to sit up and move and breathe and enjoy the space that you're in. Please visit arthritis.yoga to learn more about Steffany and her path and also the relationships that she has built up so that you can enjoy a fuller life, which is part of her organization's and business's mission. We want to thank Steffany as well as the 39 or 40 other guests that have joined us this year as we are wrapping up this phase of the You Call This Yoga Internet TV show. This is our last show.
For now.
For now. But we do invite you to visit the YouCallThisYoga.org website, the You Call This Yoga Facebook page, where we will be sharing what's going on and hope to share more from Steffany, as I'm very passionate about arthritis. It's gotten me where I am today. Thank you,
it's been
Steffany.
An absolute delight. Thank you.
Wait, I'm not.
Susan in the chat says, thank you, Howie, and yoga guests for all the pearls of wisdom. And then she adds something I don't understand. Shanti.
So let's add our own Shanti. And Steffany, before we Shanti out, any other thoughts you'd like to Shanti it with us?
Thank you so much, Howie, for this offering.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's enjoying meeting you and learning more.
Likewise, and thanks for making me laugh.
It's my job. Namaste, Steffany, and everybody out there. We look forward to further contact with you soon.
Likewise.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.